What happens when two bass road warriors spend quality time talking music and life with one of their peers? Bassist, educator, author David C. Gross and bassist and head honcho of KnowYourBassPlayer.com, Tom Semioli, trade dates with the legends of rock, jazz, funk, blues, folk, country, and more. Notes from an artist. Revealing conversations with the legends who've created the soundtrack of our lives. What happens? You're about to find out. It's another episode of Notes from an Artist.
We welcome our listener back to another captivating episode of Notes from an Artist. I am your captive host, Tom Semioli, along with David C. Gross, who at this moment is being held captive. David, say hello to our listener.
Get me out of here!
I am the prisoner, and hello, Karen. Get me out of here.
Help me, help me. Tonight's guest, David, actually understands our show. Anil Prasad is a music journalist who goes where few journalists dare to go, and that place is the essence of the artistry of his interviewee. Sound familiar?
I didn't know you were going to be able to get through that without spitting out some syllables that don't make sense, pronunciations that don't work. I'm very impressed.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
Oh, sloppy syllabic. Anyway, Anil Prasad, his online magazine is Innerviews. It is essential reading. This year, Innerviews celebrates its 30th anniversary. That is an incredible accomplishment given that we live in a media landscape wherein journalistic platforms have a very short lifespan, especially those not connected to legacy media. And in 2024, David, which is the year we're in now, we are witnessing the free fall of legacy media, and with good reason. Their content is inane. Especially in the arts and music, more sizzle than substance. But let's look at Anil's work. His body of work is astounding. He did publish a book, an Innerviews book, back in 2010, which I insist you download from his Innerviews.org platform. The span of Anil's expertise is really a testimony to his love for the big M music. Just look at the people he's had on the show, David, or he's interviewed, I should say. John Anderson, Bjork, Bill Bruford, Leo Kottke, Bill Laswell, John McLaughlin, David Sylvain, Tangerine Dream, David Torn, Ralph Towner. It's ridiculous. Front page of Innerviews, which is up now in this month of July, is a tuner with Trey Gunn, Pat Mastelletto, and Marcus Reuter. He's got the Puka Orchestra up there now, and Skerrick, who we discussed a little bit with Michael Shreve, which is an upcoming episode. Now, I only discovered Anil about a year ago on Facebook, of all places, and when I started reading Innerviews, it really hit me.
A date which will live in infamy.
How despite the fact that we live in a digital world with access to everything, it's harder to find content that really affects you. And I would say that had Innerviews been a print magazine in 1994, and I was in the magazine section of Tower Records, I'm showing my age here proudly. What's a record store? I'd have found Innerviews. I'd have bought it. I'd have gotten a subscription. I'm sure I would have gotten a free T-shirt. And Anil would have a floor in the Condé Nast building somewhere hanging out with celebrities. But in this interview, we do talk media and the good, the bad, and the ugly that goes with the loss of the monoculture. The important element here is that he is a music journalist that's doing great.
Absolutely.
I see him in the legacy of Gary Giddens, Timothy White, not as provocative as Lester Bangs or Robert Christgau or Stanley Crouch. But when Anil writes about someone, you need to read it. I mean, these are people worth discovering. And of course, David, you and I are simpatico with what Anil is doing. Of course, he's too young to remember Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, which is a huge influence on Notes from an Artist. But there's a real kinship to his work. And that reminds me, David, we need to invite Goldie Hawn.
The new draft lottery works this way. First, they put a bunch of little capsules into a big bowl. A man draws out one, opens it up, and there's a day of the year on it. They write it down, and that's the number one birthday. The guys who have the birthday on that day will be called in first. Then they draw until they've drawn all the birthdays of every day in the year, including leap year, even if it doesn't come this year, cause otherwise guys born then would only be eligible every 4 years, which isn't fair to the others, you know.
Yes, that would be great. And I know you go back to the Buster Keaton comedy, so it's great. It really is.
Sock it to me, sock it to me.
Sock it to me?
I'm not a crook.
Well, at the end of the show, as always, we will have a playlist which we will discuss. But David, now it's time to do the plugs.
Well, right before we do the plugs, I just want to do a public service announcement.
Oh, yes, let's do that, and then I'll do the plugs. Okay, go ahead. And you can edit.
When we recorded this particular show, I was having internet problems. So I actually edited a lot of my conversation out because it was a little garbled, and I want everyone to get a good, clear sound. So I apologize for that, but bear with the few things that I did leave in that may seem a little scratchy, but at least you can hear them all. And that's the Notes from an Artist public service announcement for today. Let's go plugging.
Okay, David, it's time for the plugs. You, the audience member, may be listening to David and myself every Monday night on Cygnus Internet Radio. I shall spell that for you, CYGNUS, cygnusradio.com. Cue that up on the internet browser of your choice. You, the audience, may be listening to us on our Notes from an Artist podcast, which is streaming right this very moment on Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Buzzsprout, and wherever podcasts are podificated. Subscribe to our YouTube page. Oddly enough, we call that Notes from an Artist, where you can enjoy behind-the-scenes video clips of some of our past guests. And be sure to log on to www.notesfromanartist.com to keep up with whatever we're doing at any given moment. All right, let's bring Anil Prasad into the room, Dave.
Sure you can't stay for more coffee? It's late and you've never had a second.
You know, I'd love another cup.
You've never had seconds of my coffee. And I make pretty good coffee. But that night, we both discovered UBAN.
UBAN, special coffee, because it's made with special beans, 100% Colombian, for taste and aroma so deliciously rich. Hey, how about seconds for me? UBAN, with richness worth a second cup.
Hey, Anil, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Good to see you. You are in California, yes?
Yep, San Francisco.
Oh, I lived there for 5 years, from 1990 to 1995, before, I guess, Silicon Valley became the dominating economic factor. How are things in San Francisco? We hear a lot of not too good things about San Francisco.
A lot of those not too good things are pretty accurate. I think it's in the middle of a slight rebound. I think it has a long way to go. From a musician and arts and culture perspective, I think it's a very, very difficult place to be. Most of the musicians I know have long since left for surrounding cities. Yeah, it's really kind of a playground for the incredibly wealthy or the beleaguered and homeless. There's very little in between left in San Francisco.
Yeah, we're facing the same situation. I'm in Manhattan. David is in a place called Connecticut. When I lived in San Francisco, I lived in Haight-Ashbury, Upper Haight, and then I lived for a little bit on Telegraph Hill and then Noe Valley. But I really loved the city, and it's heartbreaking to see what happened. But I mean, a lot of American cities are in trouble now, so it's not unexpected, really.
Yeah, we live in very challenging times indeed.
David, let us introduce our listener to Anil. He is a music journalist. He is an author. His ebook, Innerviews, Music Without Borders, went all the way up to #1 on Apple Books, David. That's as high as you can get, right? If I'm not mistaken. He is a commentator on the music industry and all of its machinations. And his online magazine, Innerviews, celebrates its 30th anniversary this year. Congratulations to you. It is an internationally acclaimed website. It has been praised for its in-depth conversation. Now, get this, David. Anil allows the artists the editorial platform to fully express themselves. Have you ever heard of anything like that?
Not recently, except maybe on our show where we probably get in too deep for doing stuff like that.
Yeah, but we're definitely simpatico with your approach. We let the artists talk. We don't impose our opinions on works of art. We let the audience decide. David and I have been on all three sides of the media fence as writers, artists, and publicists. And on the topic of music journalism, Anil, what's a nice guy like you doing in the music business?
I guess the question is, am I in the music business? I don't know. Are music journalists in the music business anymore? I feel like people that do things like we all do, I think that landscape has changed pretty dramatically. I mean, if you were talking about the early 90s, back then you could be a music journalist and have a full-time income, pay a mortgage, pay rent. Those days have long since gone. So to a degree, it's really about people that I think want to do this because they need to do it and feel like they want to let the world know about incredibly cool music and people. And sadly, the financial situation is secondary. I think we probably all need to have other ways of earning a living. Ironically, not dissimilarly to a lot of musicians these days.
It's exactly the same situation. I was a music journalist in the 90s full time, and I paid my rent by writing stories. And then I migrated to television because of Napster and what happened with the music business. But I grew up in the 70s in a golden era of music journalism. You had Rolling Stone, Circus, Trouser Press, NME, Spin, Downbeat, and every city had a local music paper. And even in Long Island, where I grew up, we had the Good Times, where you could read about this new local band, the Stray Cats, and the singer, Pat Benatar. And because you purchased the magazine, you had an investment in the writers and the artists. But now that's all changed with online journalism. Or were you part of the print media?
I was. I came up in the Canadian print media, even worked in television and radio over there, worked for all kinds of local weeklies, even worked for, major newspapers for a brief time. So I did experience that world. Went to journalism school thinking that was the world I would enter. Obviously, between the mid-90s and mid-2000s, everything changed. But I think you make a fair point about the relationship between the reader or viewer and the people that make the journalistic content, as it were. And I think this goes to the artistic side as well. Recordings, if you're no longer paying for a recording, do you have as much of an emotional investment in trying to really understand what it is that artist created? I think it's a problem across multiple mediums these days.
And it's a question which David and I raise. What is the purpose of music journalism if the artist and their respective publicists can put out the news? Where do we fit in?
Well, I think you do it very well. There's stories that a press release will never tell. There are stories a publicist will never tell. Press releases, promo material is usually always accentuating the positive and positioning people in the best light. Everyone's a success. Everyone's changing the world. The new album is, of course, the greatest album in the artist's career. There's a certain element of marketing / propaganda to these things. And I think what people like you do is, under the hood, what makes the artist tick, what made them who they are today, talking about their history, their background, the problems, the challenges they face. You're not going to really get that out of a publicist. I think musicians and artists in general live in a fairly precarious state unless they're a superstar. And just those stories are really interesting. How do you survive this? How do you make a full-time income? How do you connect with fans meaningfully? And how do you make art that doesn't pander, again, all while trying to stay afloat?
What I think is kind of interesting, when I started touring about 21 years old, and I made a point of not reading music journalism because I didn't really care much about it. Even then, I didn't truly believe a lot of what was going on. Bringing that up to today, every now and then I'm on Flipboard and, this is an interesting story. And I send it to Thomas and he'll go, oh yeah, that was on about 4 years ago, 5 years ago. So it becomes so crazy to try and think. Tom and I, when sometimes what we'll do is we'll take our interviews, transcribe them, and send it to our friends at Bass Musician Magazine and have them put them out. And with no remuneration, we're not even thinking about it from a financial point of view. And we're compelled to do it very much like, I believe, the avant-garde, which is the only really honest form of music that's left, because these guys never made any money. There was no David Lee Roth in the avant-garde jazz scene. So consequently, these people really believed in what they were doing. And I think you're right. Right now, journalism is something that, if it is even journalism, if it doesn't go to ChatGPT before it comes out, well, what have we got?
It's interesting to look back, and I'm old enough to remember, I'm antique enough to remember, when a music review could make or break your career. Now, when I went to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, I think it was about 2015, it was an amazing display under a 10-page letter under a glass display from Pete Townsend, blasting Rolling Stone magazine for giving Quadrophenia 3.5 stars. For a lot of kids like me, with my allowance, am I going to buy Quadrophenia or am I going to buy the new, $1 billion babies? What am I going to do with my money here? And how important music journalism was and how it affected the careers of artists. We spoke to a guy by the name of David Less last week, and this is a fascinating story. Now, David and I, we debate Weather Report on our shows. David remembers the original version of Weather Report with Miroslav Vitus. We divide everything up by bass players. And of course, I came along in the Jocko years, so David feels Miroslav is superior to Jocko. In 1978...
Well, no.
What's
Tom, let's qualify that.
Okay.
I think the first three records compositionally, it just so happened that Miroslav was in the band, but compositionally, I think those early records were better. They weren't looking for a CD 101 hit.
Downbeat gave the new Weather Report 1 star, which is a review that, in my opinion, Weather Report never recovered from. And it just so happened the guy we had on the show last week talking about his new book about Memphis was David Less. And he told us about the shitstorm that he caused when he gave Weather Report 1 star. As a matter of fact, the next month, Downbeat had to recant. They put Weather Report on the cover, and they threw David Less under the bus. And it was a scarlet letter that stuck to Weather Report for the rest of their career. And that was just one review.
Well, I mean, those guys at Downbeat kind of had an anti-fusion thing going for a very long time.
True.
I think it's fair to say Joe and Wayne had the last laugh in terms of Weather Report's profile. And I believe, are they the only jazz band to ever play arenas? I think maybe Return to Forever did a little bit of that, but Weather Report were really at the utter apex of what they did. So yeah, I can see how that would initially have been a problem. And I think, at the time of that first Weather Report record, things were very much in transition and in flux. But yeah, journalists at a certain level, had the power to kind of set cultural agendas. One might say too much power. But yeah, there could be a direct correlation between how enthusiastic a review was and actual record sales back then. And now we have this thing where both music journalism and music have been colossally devalued. A review in this, whirlwind of writers, and having that correlate to the streaming universe where basically nobody gets paid. Kind of a fascinating and different construct these days.
I learned about you on Facebook a year ago, so I missed the first 29 years of interviews. And I went back, obviously, and read your stuff. And I was thinking, like, damn, if Innerviews was a magazine, a print magazine, and I walked into my newsstand, or I walked into Tower Records or Sam Goody and went to the magazine racks, I'd have found your magazine 28 years ago.
Well, I mean, it's what Innerviews did from the start, though, really would have never worked in print, because some of those pieces I think some of them go as much as 25 to 30,000 words.
Yeah, those are books. Yeah.
Yeah. So, right from the get-go, it was designed to sort of break the constraints of print journalism, even though in the 90s it was certainly more in-depth than it is now. There's one example that is an exception, and that was Jonathan Mover's Drumhead magazine. And I was just hanging out with Jonathan over the weekend, and Drumhead would run 18 to 22-page print pieces, sadly. Currently on hiatus, but for the most part, it's not something that really would have ever worked in print.
And of course, now with online journalism, well, maybe yes and no, we're not so much beholden to advertising dollars. I mean, when I worked in the print industry, when I worked for a couple of print magazines, when the record company advertised, well, you reviewed their records and you had to say nice things about them because you wanted them to keep advertising, to keep the lights on, and to get a few shekels in your envelope every week.
Yeah, now people that run websites are, hit up by crypto and gambling companies. Can we do a guest blog or divert people to this investment website? I mean, you've seen even what's happened to mainstream news websites. You have the first third of a page will be actual content, and then the next 2/3 will be garbage, junk, sponsored stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, not so much beholden to advertising anymore, definitely. And sort of the advertising that exists is fairly disgusting at times these days.
It is. But again, I think now now that we're all online, there's a lot more advantages. We have data and analytics. We can see who's reading. One of the key takeaways also is the two-way street now that we're on, because now we hear directly from the readers. It's not just letters to the editor. So that's changed quite a bit. As a matter of fact, when I watch news things on news videos on YouTube, I right away run to the commentary from the common folk.
Yeah, as long as it's not bot generated. A lot of problems with those comments these days. But yeah, it is fascinating that people can provide their comments rational, irrational, incendiary, whatever they may be. Obviously, it's also created a lot of problems. Writers and artists can even be threatened in the comments. Pretty weird out there. We live in an extremely, this is a strange world where everyone can say whatever they want,
Right.
anonymously. So that creates certain issues, but it's definitely fascinating.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned those bots, because I see the bots are all praising various news sites in the first 10 commentaries. It's like, Anil, that was the most brilliant interview you've ever done. Anil, it's so great to have a real journalist out there like you. And I'm like, is Anil's mom writing all these comments? I mean, I'm using you as an example, but yeah.
There's a lot of nefarious AI-based bot nastiness out there.
Yeah. What is your methodology for choosing interview subjects?
Literally, it is people that I'm passionate about. I've been doing this a long time. I'm like year 34 as a music journalist. And at this point, given the factors both of you are identifying about why does one do this in such an economically challenging climate, well, if you're not doing it just because you love it, then what would the point of doing it really be? So why spend your time, these precious hours of your life, talking about anyone you're not that really interested in? That seems kind of silly to me. So I'm at the stage where I only talk to people I really want to talk to. Some people I love, people whose music I'm deeply invested in.
It's kind of the way we approach things. David and I say we love talking to our record collection.
That's exactly correct. My record collection. That is who I'm talking to. Absolutely.
We started this project as the bass guitar channel. And so obviously, both of us being bass players, we interviewed a number of bass players. And then Tom and I went, God, this is getting boring. Let's bring some other people in. Mm-hmm. And then we're going, God, there's something boring about that. Let's get some authors. For me, a book's coming out by so-and-so. Let's get them on the show. A couple of things you learn after you've done some of this is that the authors usually go, you've actually read the book.
We had Bill Wyman on for his 2 books, and he was shocked that we actually read his books. But of course, he does morning television, and they don't read books on morning television.
Yeah, what's interesting about some of those interviews is the writer or the interviewer will shamelessly upfront state, haven't read it, haven't listened to your album, but welcome. It's like, what? Why are you even bothering?
Why am I here?
And then the standards for the viewers or the readers or the listeners is they don't seem to be surprised by that anymore. Oh, the interviewer didn't read the book? Didn't listen to the music? Well, okay. It's strange, the standards that we're working with, and sometimes
matter of fact, Larry King used to brag about not reading the book, and this was one of the most famous, one of the most widely watched journalists when CNN actually had viewers. As a writer, who are some of your mentors? Who are some of the writers who inspired you?
Hard to really think of any. Lester Bangs was someone whose work I read a lot, and I thought he was extreme fun. What I do has nothing at all to do with Lester Bangs, so that wasn't really an inspiration. But I really wasn't inspired by any real music journalists, actually. More of a sci-fi guy coming out of Ellison or Carl Sagan or that sort of thing. But I really didn't pursue this based on... Actually, that's not entirely true. I used to be a big fan of Musician magazine. There are writers like J.D. Considine and Jas Obrecht over at Guitar Player. So I'm lying here, actually. There are some names that... Jude Gold over there, I was reading as a kid. Those are the ones that come to mind. People whose work I would read a lot. Musician magazine is probably the thing I read the most, setting me up for what I ended up doing.
Yeah. My favorites, and I'm sure you read Timothy White, who was Billboard editor for many years.
Exactly.
Loved Gary Giddens. Gary Giddens, you get a college education reading his articles.
Yeah, and also Dan Ouellette, as a jazz writer. So there are people that are coming to mind now as I think about this a little bit. Folks like that, people that specialized in the long form like Dan as well. Yeah, and Gary's certainly another example of that.
Yeah, matter of fact, and David and I are huge fans of a guy by the name of Dick Cavett. I don't know if you watch any of his interviews from the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, love that stuff. And you would have the punk rock guys on, and one of the great things about YouTube is the ability to go back and look at some of that stuff and the kind of antics he put up with. Probably created great. I think there was a famous John Lydon interview that he did where it's basically a total meltdown. Good fun that I wish we had that era still, where it wasn't so scripted and where anything could happen.
When I was growing up in the 70s, Dick Cavett was great. There was the David Susskind show. I don't know if they had that on the West Coast. And then, of course, we love Johnny Carson because he was such a good listener.
Yeah. Yeah, those late night talk show hosts of the era. I mean, even Joan Rivers knew how to do a good musician interview. I was actually just watching the Beastie Boys making their first appearance on that.
Wow.
And they were raucous, like animalistic kids before they turned into, the Tibetan freedom, super socially conscious, amazingly innovative group they became later. But she just like nailed them to the wall, and they were like speechless that this woman could just like completely, steamroll them in an interview. I thought that was absolutely wonderful.
My next guests have previously been referred to as a bunch of loudmouth brats and kids that stomp around the stage like awkward thugs. Well, to me, I just like to think of them as my guys. They're just a bunch of simple kids. How'd you all three get together? Juilliard? Now, your parents must be 6 of the happiest people in the world, because it was this Leavenworth.
Yeah, Charlie Rose, another phenomenal interviewer. I realize he's very controversial at this point, given some of the stuff that happened. But if you just look at the interview approach he used to take, it was kind of phenomenal. So he was someone else before his sort of public fall from grace that I was very impressed by.
Yeah, I think also with Cabot and Joan Rivers and Johnny Carson, they were performers. So they did 150, 200 nights a year on stage, so they could handle difficult interviewees.
But one thing that Joan Rivers had that I think was overall of them, she was a mom.
Yeah, they just had no idea. They were just totally speechless. It was, I don't think that group has ever been that speechless. So that's an example of an interviewer with great control and wit.
Yeah. She was a master at that. And of course, I think she was competing with Carson at the time. She probably went for a younger audience by having the Beastie Boys on. I don't know if Johnny would have had them on.
Letterman did a lot, but for a while, we're really giving away our age category. For a while, I think she was Johnny's
substitute
for quite a few years. But yeah, those are those days of late night talk show stuff. That was probably an influence on me as well. I mean, David Letterman used to have amazing musical artists on that show and some crazy avant-garde stuff. Teagham and Laurie Anderson.
Captain Beefheart was on.
Captain Beefheart. I mean, yeah.
It was a punk band that did a song called Dick Cavett. Yeah.
Really?
And it just goes to show you how the world of publicity has slid down the road. The publicist offered me the artist, and I said, I'll have the artist, but you got to get me Dick Cavett as well. And they never responded.
I'd love to see a modern day Dick Cavett interview. Quite influence on kind of the public music agenda during his classic era. Yeah. DVDs, and I think a box set of that stuff out too.
Right. He actually, very good interview with George Harrison. One of his most impressive interviews is when he had John Cleese when of course, Life of Brian came out. And that was a big kerfuffle with the Catholic Church. And I think he had a priest on and John Cleese, and it was just great stuff.
I remember that. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm a huge Python fan.
Yeah.
That would understatement. So, yeah.
One of your pieces that got a lot of attention, I think it was in 2015, where you talked about, the fingers on the self-destruct button, about Apple, Google, Spotify, and the rest of the music streaming universe. That was pretty amazing. I read that you got something like 75,000 responses, and that was in 2015.
It was an incendiary moment. No one was really providing the artist perspective. Yeah, there's a brief moment where I was music industry enemy number one. I was getting death threats when that whole thing was swirling. Untold millions of people read that commentary back then. Kind of speaks to the entitlement of the average. We used to use words like, listeners and viewers and readers, and now it's content consumers. You used to be a broadcaster, a writer, an interviewer. Now you're a content creator, right?
Exactly. Yes.
This sort of expectation that everything is free all the time. Anything that bucks that sort of party line where it's like, hey, maybe artists need to get paid. Maybe making music costs money. Maybe if you want your favorite musician to keep doing what they do and help your life be fulfilling through their art, you got to help them out a bit. And just even something that simple as a message is now controversial. And I don't know what that says about us as a species, but I don't particularly good about us at the moment.
Part of the problem, as you were mentioning earlier about how things have gotten strange, it's a lot easier with a computer screen and a keyboard to voice an opinion versus doing it in person. So folks have an idea that they can actually say anything they want. This unfiltered concept of accessibility is just something, I have a 19-year-old daughter, so I see in her life a lot of how this is playing out. And it's distressing. Hopefully, something can change it. See it happening too soon, but yeah, we're in a very strange place. And even in 2015, for something as benign as what, unless of course you were thinking. And that's the problem. I think when you get 75,000 people commenting, and most of them being negative, it's because you've actually made them think. So how dare you create something that I'm going to have to actually ponder?
Yeah, I mean, when that piece came out, it was, and there's several subsequent pieces too, but that was the big one, as it were. On one hand, you had basically artists and independent labels 100% in agreement. And then on the other hand, on the content consumer side, as it were, a lot of indignity, a lot of how dare you take away free stuff from me. And what's funny is, I mean, if anyone wants to Google the background of that article, it's incredible what people said about me. Like I had some control over the thing. Yeah, because I wrote that article, going to change, and you're suddenly going to have to pay for everything that used to be free. I'm like, I'm pretty sure a news article doesn't have that potential impact. Rather, it's just trying to get you to think about what goes into the making of music and the worthiness of ensuring people get paid for what they do. I mean, just like basic ideas, like if you look at, civilizations past, centuries that have gone by, what do we look to about those eras? I mean, mostly what we celebrate is the arts and culture. Obviously, a lot of terrible things and wars and famine and disease and some not so good history we look back on as well. But from a positive perspective, we look at the marvels of ancient Greece or ancient Rome, the architecture, the visual art, and even the music, such as it was documented. And so people, I feel, need to think about the arts in 2024 the same way. Arts, culture, music, these are critically important things to our lives, to our psyche. What would your life be without these things? Why are you donating to politicians? Do they make your life better? Really? Do they make, why are you giving X political party $500 instead of like giving a musician $8 for an album? Which of those two people is really more important to you? And 20 years from now, are you going to still be worried about that politician, or wonder if that artist, has a new album out or something cool to go check out? Really pretty basic stuff in some ways, but going back to the social media stuff, the manipulation, we have a civilization with its collective priorities pretty seriously out of whack here.
Well, David and I experienced that when we did Notes of an Artist. We did a couple of benefit shows, and the musicians were shocked that we paid them out of our pockets. And David, I think we paid them the same amount of money. We didn't have much to spend. It was right after COVID. And we're like...
But also we were collecting the money for Who's Teen Cancer.
Right, it was for teen cancer, right? Who cares? But we were doing benefits and putting on shows, and we were actually paying the musicians. And David, I think the salaries haven't changed since 1980 when it comes to paying musicians.
1980? My God, since 1970. It's remarkable how little value people do put on live music in particular. $100, and they seem, and we're not talking, hack musicians. We have people from the Hoople, people from a whole variety of things of art ilk, and they were still just amazed at being paid for a benefit.
Yeah, getting paid.
You get paid for doing what you do. That's what's important.
Yeah, it feels like there's been this like conditioning that's happened in the music business where musicians almost just accept the conditions of their labor. And, a lot of times I point to the Screen Actors Guild and the Writers Guild of America and what they did by going on strike against the studios and the streaming services.
Right.
Last year, and they changed the economic dynamics of what they did, not perfectly, but they made a very strong impact. They shut down a multi-billion-dollar industry temporarily and forced them to come to the table with more equitable terms. So they know, the Writers Guild of America and the Screen Actors Guild, they know their worth. They know they're worth more, and they're willing to fight for it. Whether or not musicians always understand that, I don't know, but I certainly wish they could sort of collectively get together and sort of figure out a way to to address some of these problems.
Yeah, I think the musicians union drops the ball on that. But it's interesting in a way, as a fan, as a record buying fan and collector, the music industry really signed its own autopsy when CDs came out. Now CDs cost pennies on the dollar to manufacture, to make, and they charged $18 for a CD. And then add to that the fact that most of the stuff was catalog, so there was no production in it. There was nothing there. So what happened is, they baby boomers like myself, we wanted to buy our record collections back with a few bonus tracks, and we paid a fortune for them. So then when digital technology and Napster became available to the masses, well, people started stealing music. And it was, I remember, I think it was maybe the 2001, 2002 Grammys where Metallica did a great sketch when, the drummer, Lars, went into a kid's dorm room and stole all his stuff. And it's amazing how the people turned on him. They saw him as a greedy, rich rock star. But as you know from being around musicians, Metallica, they've got roadies, they've got accountants, they've got agents, they've got to pay liability insurance. They're a business. They're not, these guys just sitting around in the lap of luxury. Of course, they sell a lot more records, so they probably do sit around in the lap of luxury comparatively, but it's a business. And, I worked as a tour publicist, and, they rode the bus at night. The whole perception that the public had was skewed.
Well, and that's still skewed. This day, I think there's this idea that if a musician is up on a stage and there's, say, hundreds of people in the audience, everyone automatically assumes that musician must be doing really well, where really it's only when you get to the thousands of people in the audience. And even then you still might not be making money and you might be barely breaking even. Yeah, the economics are extremely harsh, and with inflation and everything that's going on, and you mentioned liability insurance. Sure. Is a massively escalating expense.
It's a funny thing. I own a business that brings music programs into the New York City schools. And 25 years we've been doing this. And one of the reasons I started doing it was to give musicians opportunity to make money during the day and to be creative at night, not having to do the shitty little gigs, whether they be weddings or club dates or have you. So, I had about 40 schools that I was working with, and these guys were making a nice living during the day. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that really was amazing to me is that they all went back to doing all that other stuff at night. The reason I bring this up is while a certain number of musicians will strike, there's always those guys in the corner there. Oh, wow. Yeah, we'll do this gig for free.
Yeah.
It's human nature. I think that has a lot to do with it.
Well, you're absolutely right about what the Actors Guild did. For my website, and David has the bass guitar channel, I have Know Your Bass Player. And so many of the bass players that I interviewed, guys who played on the biggest stages with the biggest artists, they all had a spouse or a partner that was the financial bedrock of the family. It wasn't their playing, it wasn't their career on that big stage that you mentioned that paid the bills, that put the kids through college. Now, of course, a lot of them were British, so they had what's known as national health care and affordable housing, something we don't have here in the United States. So that helped. But yes, you're absolutely right. Musicians seem to be conditioned for some reason not to get paid, or at least
the MU in the UK, the Musicians Union, even to this day still have pensions.
Yes,
believe it or not. And if you were one of those musicians during the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and you've retired, you could be living a fairly good life. So yeah, there was an era when we took care of these people in a different way.
Yeah. So yeah, that is true. Well, tell us, Anil, what do you have yet to write? What's on your bucket list?
My bucket list? What you mean in terms of people that I would like to interview?
Yes.
That I would like to do. I've managed to talk to largely everybody that I've hoped to. I mean, there's certain white whales, as they were, that seem fairly inaccessible, the Kate Bushes or Gabriels or Brian Enos of the world. If you want to call those bucket lists, I guess people like that. But, there's extremely cool things. I've always wanted to talk to Janice Siegel from the Manhattan Transfer, one of my favorite jazz vocal acts. And that just happened. And that's going to actually be the next piece on Interviews.
Oh, great.
there's a great Weather Report story in that when it comes out, when they played the Playboy Jazz Festival in the early 80s, and they did a hybrid version of Birdland where, the first half was Weather Report proper, and it, without announcing them, seamlessly shifted into the vocalese version. Manhattan Transfer did with Weather Report backing them. It's a great story there. So that was a pretty cool one. But those are kind of the big ones, I suppose. And actively contemplating a new Innerviews book. I'm not sure I have the constitution for it, or would people even want another print book? The last one was 2009. I don't know how that works anymore in 2024.
Would you consider, we just had Phil Manzanera on the show.
Yeah.
And he's self-published with Wordsworth. We asked him why he did that. Said, well, you're Phil
Mm-hmm.
Manzanera, right? Now we think he's a rich guy. As a matter of fact, he made more money on the what was it? On the Jay-Z Eminem. Yeah, the Kanye West thing than he did in all his career, his 50-year career with in and out of Roxy Music. But he is going the self-publishing route.
I mean, that thing came out in this. I bought that book in this gorgeous box set. It has like a CD and a set of goggles and a little pin in it. It was not cheap, to say the least. Yeah, I presume the idea was find the core. I'm a Manzanera geek, so find the core audience and sell it directly to them. I would have hoped he would have made a bunch of money on that last Roxy Music Arena tour.
Well, I think he did, but obviously the Kanye money was much more. And you did those public interviews with Bill Bruford.
Yeah, just last weekend. Yeah.
Yeah. How was that? How did you feel doing that?
That was good fun. That was completely unexpected opportunity to be on the road with Bill Bruford for 3 days. I think the teenage kid inside of me, his head was probably exploding the whole time, all the while I was pretending to be cool and calm. I had to hit the road between New York City and Philly, sitting in a van with Bill for 3 hours. That was a trip, but he's an absolute gentleman, a consummate professional, knows how to tell great stories, and I think this is very new for him as well. I don't think he'd really done much of this since retiring. So those crowds are pretty big at Sony Hall and the Keswick Theater, 1,500 to 2,000 people a night, I think, which is amazing. I think it just speaks to his legacy and how interested people are in the incredible stuff that he was responsible for. He was doing it part of a co-bill with the group Project, Mike Keneally and Ryo Okamoto and Alessandro Del Vecchio and Pete Griffin, and 2/3 of that band's set is Bill Bruford related material. Yes, King Crimson,
right?
UK, the band Bruford, etc. So it seemed like a good bill for people to combine, the originator of some of this music with a band that's sort of carrying the baton forward.
Yeah. Will any of those interviews make it to video? Because I haven't seen anything on YouTube yet, unless that's me.
New York was filmed, professionally filmed, but it's only been like 3 days since those happened. So I think Bill will decide what happens with that footage. It'd be great if it would come out, but unfortunately, that's not my decision to make.
I think that's a real viable platform. I think that's a great hybrid journalism platform to actually have live interviews. Of course, they've been doing it for years here, 92nd Street Y and things like that.
Yeah. I mean, the audience was so into it, and they had so many interesting and sometimes crazy questions for him, and he handled them all extremely elegantly. One woman even brought the original triangle that was used on Close to the Edge to the front and was playing it for him in line. I thought that was classic. I hope that stuff got captured somehow. Yeah,
well, that was the thing. I mean, most obviously 92nd Street Y, it's mostly celebrities. And I was like, wow, he's talking to Bill Bruford. Like, who would think to talk to Bill Bruford in front of a live audience?
Yeah, that was David Lefkowitz's idea. He runs Blue Note. He's one of the key heads of Blue Note Entertainment in New York City. He runs the Jazz Festival that this event was a part of. And I think Bill actually has a huge jazz history. People tend to obviously associate Bill with prog rock, but between the group Bruford and his work with Earthworks and Ralph Towner, Eddie Gomez, he really has some very serious jazz credentials. So I think that's how it meshed.
That makes sense. That makes absolute sense. So, Anil, of course, we always have a playlist on our show. So what are we going to put on your playlist, Anil?
Playlist. You mentioned Weather Report. Huge fan. You were talking about the two different eras. I was going to bring up Black Market as kind of the cutover record.
Okay.
one of my favorite records of all time. That would certainly be up there. We're talking about Beastie Boys.
Yeah, give me some Beastie Boys.
You can play Check Your Head. That's one of my favorite, most innovative sample-based records of all time. You could stick in some Kate Bush in there, probably from Hounds of Love. There's a great new Kronos Quartet meets Sun Ra record that just
great record.
Yeah, that record, yeah, with like Laurie Anderson, Secret Chiefs on it. So that has my ear at the moment. What else is there's a guy named Marcus Reuter, this amazing touch guitarist. He has a great band called Anchor and Burden with a drummer named Asaf Circus. If you've never heard of him, you'd probably be blown away. Marcus is called Stickman with Tony Levin as well. So those are a few things that I dig.
All right. Good, man. Good. Well, hey, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
All right. I wish you continued success. We'll be reading interviews, and we'll send you a link and all the other stuff when it airs in about, what, 2 weeks, David?
Yes, indeed.
All right. Let's just hope there's a music business in 2 weeks from now. So, all right.
I don't think it's going away that quick.
Probably right after this show airs, it'll probably, that's it.
They'll figure out a way to pay people less in 2 weeks.
Good to hear somebody in our boat.
That's what it is. We'll owe them.
We'll owe them. Yes, David, exactly. So, all right, Anil, be well. Good to see you.
Thank you so much for your time, everyone.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.
David, what a great conversation with Anil Prasad.
Yeah, I'm glad I was there for it. You don't really know I was there.
Right, David is missing in action.
It's the Tom Semioli show.
It's the only way we can keep David quiet is to destroy the internet. This Anil Prasad playlist is nearly impossible to curate. We did our best. We're taking artists from the latest issue of Interviews and some from the Interviews book. Among our playlist playees will be Tuner, will be Puka Orchestra, Skerrick. We also have Joe Zoenal, Chris Whitley, Eberhard Weber, Coy Tyner, David Sylvain, and Bill Laswell queued up. David, who else have we got?
Well, we've got a little bit of weather report, some Beastie Boys, Kate's Bush, Kronos Quartet, Marcus Reuter, and Tony Levin's band, Stickmen.
Stickmen, we're the Stickmen. That's... Greetings and salutations to Tony Levin, who listens to the show along with Karen. Well, thank you, Anil, for being our guest. We hope to have you back on. David, we have some exciting shows coming up.
Yeah, we've got Michael Shreve, we got Phil Freeman, we have Michael Galopi, that's how you pronounce it.
Galop.
Michael Veal, if he ends up sending us the book, Simon Reynolds, who already sent us the book. Who else we got there, buddy?
We should have Chris Kimsey, and a little later on in the year, we're going to have some real big rock stars like Lita Ford and Phil Lewis of LA Guns. So get your spandex out, David. I know you still have that in your closet.
That's right, the most forgiving of fabrics.
Trusting eyes, the children's show, minds open, hearts true, our spirits grow, the touch, the feel, the fabric of our lives, the touch, the feel of cotton, the fabric of our lives.
And that is the fabric of our interview, folks. My name is Tom Semioli. Thanks for listening.
My name is David Seagross, and thank you one and all. But it's been a great show, and we'll see you next week with Michael Shreve.
Bye-bye.